All right, we are going to start with Forever Grateful, a review over on our iTunes account. It says, I normally am not one to leave a review, but I can't go on listening any further without expressing my thanks. A friend shared your podcast with my husband a few months ago, and it has been a complete game changer for us. Before listening, I had never heard of betrayal trauma or specialized help, boundaries, etc. My jaw literally dropped in the first episode because for the first time I felt validated, and more importantly, I felt hope. I have since listened to every episode and recently caught up. Within the short span of listening, my husband and I have sought out specialized help and have both begun the process of recovery. Thank you for being brave and putting yourself out there week after week. I am forever grateful. I will be a lifetime listener and forever fan. Thank you. Also, I have to tell you that I recently had our first baby, and I have listened to your podcast so much that our baby calms down whenever he hears your voices. So not only are you all legends in my book, you are also my go-to baby soother.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That's crazy.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you, whoever you are.
I think it's your voice, Kobe. It's the calm, soothe of your voice.
I'm sure that's what it is. Too bad that doesn't happen with my wife and kids.
Yeah.
This does not have the same effect with my family.
I really like, the baby part really brought a smile on my face.
Totally.
But that she's found hope. That's why we set out to do this. And I just want to reiterate, there is hope. And we can't say that enough.
Yeah, totally.
There is hope no matter what situation you're in. You can find healing, you can move forward, you can find peace. So
For sure. So I wanted to just share just a quick update. So we got a dog for our girls for Christmas, and this took a lot of lobbying on my part with
the
Ashley.
girls and for Kobe. Let's be honest.
And once we actually started like the journey of like, okay, let's get a dog, then it took reluctance is not close to the measure of Ashlyn's resistance to a dog. But I will say we've had him now for 2 weeks?
Yes.
Over 2 weeks now. And the one that the dog loves the most is for sure Ashlyn.
Yeah.
Like she put him on the bed to wake me up, and then she left the room, and he was like whining as I was like holding him in this little cozy like blanket. And so anyways, it's really funny because Ashlyn's like, oh, Tico. And anyways, so the funny thing is about this is 2 days ago, Tico doesn't, when Ashlyn and I are together, Tico doesn't come to me. He goes to Ashlyn. But we were sitting at the island, and Tico walks over to Ashlyn, and she's like, "Hi, Tico," and she's on her phone working, and Tico's right next to her, and he pees, and then he just walks away real coolly.
Lots of that happening.
Hey, Mom, thinking of you. Pee. And he just like moseys away. And then the cool part about that is that happened a second time in like 10 minutes.
We've been talking about our dogs peeing a lot in our episodes.
It's a relative.
Don't get a dog,
reality.
guys.
Yeah.
Whatever. She loves Tico. She loves Tico. It's really funny.
He's grown on me.
Yeah, whatever. She's like playing it cool, but legit, she gets up at like 6:30 to like take him out. I get up in the middle of the night, but it's rad.
All right, let's get started.
Okay, so I want to share a story to start and introduce the topic today.
Okay.
I joined a Toastmasters club.
Oh,
Did
yeah.
you?
I used to be in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
You can't tell from the way I
Well,
talk,
actually,
but
yeah, now I get it.
Toastmasters helps
yeah.
you not say a lot of ums and likes.
Right. So,
Which I do.
So for those of you that don't know, a Toastmasters club is a club where you go and you practice public speaking. And so you get a chance to give speeches, and they rate you, and they give you critical feedback, they give you positive feedback. I mean, you got to have thick skin to go and do this, but you're practicing being able to speak. And so I gave my first speech, and I thought, man, I'm going to kill it. And I did okay, but my speech was about failure. And so I was Mr. Therapist Man, acting as if, I'm perfectly fine with failure and blah, blah, blah. And I get up and I say, I introduce myself. I say, my name is Brandon Patrick, and I'm a failure. And then I go on and I give this speech. And afterwards, this guy comes up to me, and he introduces himself, and he's a psychotherapist, PhD psychotherapist guy. He's like, I want to correct something that you said. Say, okay. He said, you're not a failure. Don't believe that you're a failure. And I thought, he said, there's a difference between being a failure and failing. You can fail, but you are not a failure. And I like that a lot. I mean, really, he's breaking down my spike narrative, looking at the shame of it. I don't become failure when I fail. Failure can actually be a really positive thing and a good thing when you fail, right? But it doesn't consume you. It doesn't become you. And so that's what we want to talk about today is with addiction, with betrayal trauma, with the intense emotions that you have around these things. Oftentimes it consumes you, the shame takes over, and you feel like you're just a failure. When you relapse, when you fall into old behaviors that you're trying to overcome, you feel like you're just a failure. Mm-hmm. So do you guys want to speak to your experience with that?
Oh man, have I got experience with it. So I was, I can remember I was exposed to porn at 7, discovered masturbation about 13. And by the time I was in high school, I remember that was really the first time where I was like, this is probably like the last time I'm going to do that. That's the last time I'm going to masturbate. And it was like late night TV or something like that because I didn't have access to porn at, various times. And what began to happen is the more that I would act out, and then I would say, yeah, I'm not going to do that again, or I don't want to do that again, or I would feel pangs of guilt at church, or that was primarily where I felt it. Then I would begin to say, yeah, I'm not going to do that anymore. And what began to happen is every time I would relapse, I would begin to acknowledge those internally as failures. And so what happened is with every relapse, every time that I acted out, it was like, I failed. So there began to be this neural pathway in my head and this self-definition of failing over and over and over again that perpetuated this thought process of I'm a failure. Then this is kind of like the Spider-Man, the Dark Spider-Man. Right?
I don't know Spider-Man very well.
What happened is that failure, the failure in acting out that I would have, right, that began to affect everything else in life, and it can begin to spill over into everything else. For example, if I did really crappy on like a test, I'm a failure, and it's probably because I acted out, this week or yesterday or this morning or whatever it is, last night, and I failed then in relapsing. And so that's why I failed this test, or I did really bad in this report, or whatever the case is. And then that grew from outside of the world of academics into sports, so that if I lost the game or if I missed a field goal, then it was because I was a failure. And it was like, and then God came into it, right? Where I was like, God is seeking vengeance on me. He's a God of wrath and a jealous God, and he is, he's serving justice to me because I'm a failure. And so it began, this idea and concept of failure began to, Ash was looking at me with this really quizzical face, like, wait, seriously? And I'm like,
you're just talking a lot.
Well, I'm just trying to describe
tell us where you're going.
I'm just trying to describe, this is how it perpetuated in every aspect of my life. So anytime something bad happened, it went back to the original, it reinforced the idea for me that I was a failure because I had failed. And so anything that didn't go right was reinforcing that whole thought process.
When you start believing you're a failure, then what do you start creating in your life?
Lots more of it.
Lot more.
Way more of it.
Failure, right?
Yeah. And I start finding it. Hence the idea of, I found it in sports. I found it in
find all of the evidence
church.
that you're a failure.
Exactly.
I can't be good at anything, so of course I'm not going to be able to fight this other thing.
Totally.
Right.
So that whole idea and concept is why failure for me. And then I would and the way out of failure, legit, was if I'm not failing, that means I have to be perfect. And so I begin to chase.
All or
the
nothing.
pursuit of perfection was this dribble wheel that just kept going and going and going, because if I wasn't perfect, that meant that I would fail, right? And so then I started to judge myself. And the truth is this, is that I would probably act out percentage-wise through adolescence and early years of our marriage. It was probably like, I don't know, 5% of the time. But I let that 5% of the time be the definition of the rest of me, because I had this belief that I was a failure. So failing is for me one of the most painful words. It was. And actually, that's not true. It's not was. It probably still is in a lot of ways. And I am failure adverse. I'm okay with struggle, and I welcome that. And I try to focus on progress, because there's been such a huge definition of my life and everything else in it on failure. Like failure's dominated my thought process in so many ways because of addiction.
Right.
And we wonder why addiction's the great thief of self.
So we were kind of, Kobe, you and I were kind of talking back and forth about, this topic.
Yeah. And I'm like, wait, we need to record this.
Well, and I was saying, and I hear what you're saying, which is, I don't want to define anything as failure, right? I don't want to define it as that, because that's what I did forever, and I'm done with that. And it's progress, it's growth, it's moving forward, right? And I was saying, well, why not accept failure? Why not define it as failure, but not have a problem with it? Look at failure and say, look, I'm failing. I failed at that, but that's okay. That's the process of life. I've never met anybody who hasn't failed at something. Have you guys?
No,
right? and if we don't fail, then we don't grow. And so, to define yourself as a failure is different than saying, oh, I failed at that. I didn't come through. I made a mistake. It's a good thing to be able to take a look at, as not to just put rose-colored glasses on and say, no, everything's perfect, and I never actually. I never make a mistake. No, I do make a mistake, but that's perfect. I accept that I do. I accept that I fail, because as I fail, I grow, and as I grow, I'll become better.
So here's that difference that you're mentioning at the end of that, is that when you were saying, I can't accept that, you were also not doing anything to get out of the fall, right?
Staying stuck in the shame.
And now you do have tools and a skill set to get out of those falls and those failures. And so maybe you're seeing it the same.
I think we are. I think we're saying the same thing.
We are, but what's happened is, though, is my definition came from, like, countless, we'll call it, relapses that reaffirmed, that I was a failure. But then that began to, then I began to see failures in everything else in life. And so conceptually and in theory, I agree with what you're saying. But my pushback on it is my experience was very different. It's kind of like saying my self-worth needs to come from God because I'm his son and so forth. Well, the truth is that I didn't accept God as a loving God until I showed self-love and self-compassion for myself.
Right.
I forgave myself.
Right.
Then that opened up a door to have a relationship with God. And so it's kind of the same thing in the sense that it's like, I still don't use that word failure. And I kind of use it as like, this is like the new F word, if you will, for me in a lot of ways, because it's like, I'm okay with saying, look, I totally fell, or I made a mistake here, or I messed up here, because there probably still is.
But Cody, I'm hearing you say you don't use the word failure because it has such a connection to shame for you, right?
Yeah.
Where, like, I fail as a dad. I failed last night as a dad. I fail as a husband. I fail as a therapist. I can say those things. I can own that. I'm okay with that. It doesn't define me.
Totally. But our experience early in life with that is very different. And that's why you can say that doesn't define me. And
right. But what the ultimate point that I'm trying to get to is this, is that it's a shame screen to avoid it. It's a shame screen to say, no, I'm not doing it.
Okay.
It's to be able to say, I am doing it and I own it, but it doesn't have power over me. It doesn't have that shame. It doesn't define me anymore. I understand where you're coming from with it, right?
But what you're saying is
But
the
it's owning
avoidance of the term
It still has power.
failure still has power over me, which I totally agree with. In fact, just thinking this, I'm like,
And
I need the MDR
we
on
could
this.
change the word. I mean, we could call it growth instead of failure.
Mhm.
That's fine.
Mhm.
I grew last night as a dad.
Mhm.
I'm growing as a therapist.
Yeah.
I'm growing
being
as a husband.
stretched.
Right, whatever we want to call it, but it's an
Mhm.
acceptance of I'm not perfect, and I'm in a process of growth in this life,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna make mistakes, right?
Mhm.
And that's a reality for all of us.
Mhm.
And if we can't accept that reality, then we're gonna stay stuck in the shame, and we're gonna try to be perfect, and we're gonna try to be enough, which we can't get to.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I totally understand what you're saying, and I guess the only place that I would argue on this is not in disagreements, but my point would be that was what you're talking about is advanced recovery for me.
Right.
I can't project it on anybody else because it's still obviously painful, and it was early in recovery, and it's lost its pain because I probably substituted that word with growth or being stretched or falling forward.
is
You know what I
good.
mean?
Right.
And that's just what I needed in order to get to where I am right now. But your point is well taken. And if I'm adverse, if I'm avoiding that term, is because I've given it a lot of power, and which is shame.
Fall forward. And here's the F words for you. Fall forward, fail fast,
Mhm.
right? All these, little phrases that, but they're true. So
Mhm.
fail fast. Why fail fast? So you can learn, so you can grow. Fall forward. So when you fall, make sure. I say to my guys who relapse, I say get maximum return out of your relapse.
Mhm.
So what that means is let's look at it. Let's step right into it. Let's face it. Let's deal with where you're sucking it up.
Mhm.
Like, but this is really difficult for an addict to do, because in that moment they're in the addiction cycle, and the part of the cycle they're in is shame.
Totally.
And in that shame cycle, what the last thing they want to do is turn and look at where am I not strong. But it's the thing that kind of kills the shame is look, you're connected to me, you're connected to this group, we can talk openly about it, you're okay, you're still loved, and you made a mistake.
Mhm.
And so we can look at that mistake so you can grow from it going forward.
Did you observe, Ashlyn, this cycle in me as an individual, as a dad? Is this news to you? I guess here in my context of failure.
No, I think I saw it because we did not talk about these things for years, for decades. And so I think I just saw it in the cycle of I'm going full force. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do it. I'm sorry. I hit the table. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to do it 100%. And then when you do fall and fail, you give up. And that was the Kobe cycle. And so we saw it in a lot of different areas of your life. And it's a kind of a hard topic in some areas still to talk about because of this cycle of failure.
Right.
And so, yeah, I saw it for sure.
I got to share with you guys my New Year's resolution. One of them is to get up at 5:15 every day and meditate and exercise before I go to work.
How's it going?
I haven't done it yet.
That's rad.
But so I was thinking about it yesterday, and I was like, "Hey, do I really want to do this or not?"
Are you making yourself?
Yeah, and I think I came to the conclusion that I do. But in order to really start and be motivated, I need to accept that I failed in the start. To get out of the starting line and get into this. That's okay. It's not going to motivate me to think you're horrible because you failed and you suck. But it's going to help me to say, okay, you do want this. You're in that stage of change of preparation right now, and you're in contemplation a little bit. So let's move into some action. That's okay. I am right where I am today. I failed this week to actually get into that. I'm not going to start it if I stay stuck in shame. I'll be unmotivated.
Right. Because you don't see the end goal of like it actually happening.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking how bad I suck and how I'm not going to actually do this and blah, blah, blah. That won't help me. And it's the same thing with addiction. How many times, for our audience, I want them to think, how many times have you relapsed and you've thought, I'm never going to do that again. Oh my gosh, I'm never going to do that again. And then you find yourself doing it again.
Yeah. For me, as a betrayed, it was the moments where I would lash out, or I would go into old behaviors of name calling and bring up the past or whatever, and leave the room and literally say, what is wrong with me? Like,
right.
I said I wasn't going to do that, and here I am.
I'm doing it again.
Yeah.
Right. So if Spike comes in, takes over and says, you're just a failure, then you're more likely to do it again. But if self-reflection comes in and you have the strength to look at your struggles, then you can say, oh, I need to work on this, or I need to work on that so that I can tweak this. So when I move forward, I have that growth, right? So failure, I know we differ, Kobe. Failure is awesome.
No, I think what we've just unearthed is my the power that the word failure still has on me, and part of the thought that I have is that improperly used in society. I don't even know what the actual definition of failure is, because it's like it. So for instance, if I'm Tom Brady and I am 34 of 48 in my passes on a particular game. I don't have 14 failed passes. They call them incompletions, right? And so I think there is a way to capture failure in more accurate ways that facilitate more self-love and self-compassion. And I would also argue that failure is too widely used, and maybe even more of a generational term that has been used culturally to describe something. And anyways, I clearly have got a lot of work to do.
I like your Tom Brady analogy, because there is a dialectic here, or a balance here between, we can notice all of the ways that we fail all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that some perfectionists actually accomplish a lot in their lives because they're trying so hard to, never get an A- or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you also don't want to go to the other side of it, which is like, I'm not going to strive for success because, like, what's the point? And so there's a balance between, I'm going to push it, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to do my best, do the best that I possibly can, and then I'm going to accept where I'm deficient. I'm going to accept where I struggle. And that's where peace comes, is accepting that we fail, but also being in our integrity and doing our best at whatever we're setting out to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
very interesting.
I'm thinking, last year, this time of year, we set some habit goals. And one of them was that I would love Kobe in his love languages. And it was embarrassing to me to think I have to set goals in order for me to love him the way he wants to be loved. So I did this for 6 months, and it was this. Only I had 20% of the time I could fail. And I could accept that. Okay. But any more than that, like, I had to start over because I had really failed at this.
Okay.
This goal that I was trying to reach. And it was interesting because I was talking to a friend a month ago, and my love language is Kobe's is words of affirmation and physical touch. Mine are acts of service and time. So mine are a little more effort, you know, to complete and to show me that you love me. And I hadn't really thought of that. And my friend a month ago said, people who have words of affirmation and physical touch are the easiest to love. You can just hug them and say, I love you. And they're like totally filled up. And I felt so much failure in what I had done that year because she made it sound so simple.
Like, this is so easy, Ashton. How come you can't do this?
How can you not do this? Yours is so hard. He has to work so much harder to love you. And I was like, oh my gosh, like something that I had thought I had done pretty good in. She just told me like,
You suck.
you
Right,
suck.
Right.
How is
Shame
that
trigger,
hard?
boom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it is because it's not easy for me, which sounds terrible, but not
doesn't-
because I don't love him.
But it doesn't sound terrible because that's reality,
right.
right? That's something that you struggle with to show him that love language, right?
Right.
And that's not a horrible thing, Ashton. If you can recognize that and you can see it,
Mhm.
then you can actually start to shift it. But
Right.
but if you're like, no, I'm a good enough wife and I do everything perfect, then you're not gonna work on that.
Yeah. No, I've just been sitting in that like, she's so right.
Yeah.
She's so right. Why am I making this so hard?
Right.
So
That's
it's been
super
good.
Interesting.
That's awesome. I like that story. Yeah.
So, other thoughts on this?
Go fail, guys.
Yeah. It's a lot what Brandon's saying, but in our women's groups, when the women check in and they say either they relapsed or their spouse has relapsed, it can be a really emotional time
Yeah.
and really hard. And so it's the job of the group and for me as a facilitator to say, okay, let's learn from this and let's see some growth.
Yeah.
Because you can fall and you can fail, but as long as you are choosing to see something as a learning experience and grow from it, it's okay.
That's where group and other people can really help, is if you are shame resilient enough to look at your blemishes, then they can reflect back to you like, oh, this is kind of what you're doing. And they can hold space and give you love while they're reflecting that back to you. And that's where good therapy happens, because you're actually working on something and you're feeling love at the same time. So a group is awesome. Good support is awesome to talk about your failures, to work through your failures with.
Yeah. I mean, one girl, the holidays just passed, so it's lots of triggers happening during that time. And one of the girls said, if I had told this to a friend or a family, I don't think it would have happened. The outcome would have been very different. There would have been a lot of judgment and like, you are so crazy. Why are you still with him?
Right.
And yet you can come to a group or find your support of women or men who can understand and validate and empathize and also speak truth to you.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's the benefit.
I love it. I'd like to finish with a story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I love it.
So yesterday afternoon, one of my children just went nuts and she was yelling and everything. And so at dinner, we had a really good talk, and we were talking as a family. We were talking about it. You guys are going to laugh, but this is like such a therapist thing to do. But we were talking about our emotions and how we're all different and how we express our emotions differently. And sometimes what we do with them is really good, and sometimes what we do with them, causes some problems and consequences that we don't like. And it was a great talk, and all the kids were engaged, and some of them were like, "Yeah, I do this with my emotions," and they're like playing it out and
Aww.
showing us. And,
I love it.
yeah, and so it was good. And then 2 hours later, it was bedtime, and I was getting my son out of the tub, and he wouldn't get out of the tub. And he wouldn't get out of the tub. No matter how much I asked him or whatever I did, he wouldn't get out. And my emotions started amping up. And then I find myself just like, get out of the freaking tub now. And right after that, he's like looking at me like, whoa, what the heck, Dad? Yeah. Right after that, it hit me like, oh, I just did the very thing that I talked to them about working on, right? And then the shame started kicking in, like, what? You're a failure as a dad. Like you just modeled to them the thing that you're trying to work with them on. But luckily I caught my shame and I realized, you know what? Like I failed. I made a mistake. I lost my cool. It wasn't effective what I did. And then I talked to my wife about it, and she held some space for me. And it was actually really good for me, but it wasn't a great moment as a father, right? So I'm grateful for failure. I know I'm going to fail going forward. We all are. And you know what, Kobe, just for your sake, I'll say I'm grateful for growth. Okay.
That's awesome. Okay, go. So I'm going to talk on our deep dive for this episode. I'm going to talk about some of the specific strategies, the mindful strategies that I've used to help me deal with failing, in dealing with falling short, in dealing with how to mentally keep myself out of perfection or failure. And there's some very specific things that I've done very habitually to get there. And we're gonna talk about those on the deep dive.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And the deep dive, for those who are maybe new, are our bonus episodes that are private and available for our Patreon members. So thank you guys for being here.
Awesome. See ya.
Appreciate it. See you guys.